I want to turn to chapter 22, verse 21. Hold on one second. Chapter 22, verse 21. What is this pasuk? The pasuk is very, very powerful verse. And the verse says as follows. It states, well, actually, let's go back to verse 20. V'ger lo toneh. This is a stranger amongst you. You shall not oppress. V'lo tochatzenu. Don't oppress twice. Ki ger ma'isem be'eretz Mitzrayim, because you were strangers in the foreign land. What does this mean? V'ger lo toneh. The stranger you shall not vex, not oppress. This refers to afilu onos devarim. The Gemara in Bava Metzia tells us this refers to even just oppressing them with words. Shelo yomer lo, you shouldn't say to him, Zechor ma'asecha harishonim, or Zechor ma'asev osecha. You can't say to a person, either a convert or a person who's a penitent, you can't say to them, oh, I see what you're doing now. Now you're so holy. But originally, I remember who you were. I remember what you were, that 3 years ago you're eating pork and now you're walking around like you're a holy Jew. I know what kind of person you are. Sorry, you're not allowed to say that to such a person. You're not allowed to do that. And in the Mishnah in Bava Metzia, it tells us that you say as follows: if he's a penitent, you can't say, I remember what you were like before you became a holy roller. And if he's a convert, you can't say to him, I remember what your ancestors used to do. And meaning to say, you're not only not allowed to remind him of his own actions, Tosfos says, but you're not even allowed to remind him of his ancestors' actions. And so that's the simple explanation of this verse. And then, and this idea that Rabbi Eliezer Agadol taught in Bava Metzia, that the Torah warns us in 36 places that we're not allowed to oppress the stranger. In 36 places, we're warned not to oppress the convert. And if a person oppresses the convert, then he's in violation of 3 prohibitions. What are the 3? V'ger lo toneh, v'chi yagur etcha ger ba'artzachem, lo tonu oto, v'lo tonu ish et amito. You're not allowed to oppress your friend. And also, in addition to that, if you vex him, lo tochatzenu, you're also in violation of 3 prohibitions. So, what's the reason? The Gemara in Bava Metzia tells us, Rabbi Nassim taught, what does it mean? Because you were strangers in the land. If you have a defect, don't say it to your friend. And since you were once strangers in a foreign land, you were once refugees, you therefore should not remind it of other people. Interestingly, that's usually the case when people do pick up their voice and harass other people. When they have their own defects, that's the ones that they remind of other people. And now it comes to the verse, Kol almana v'yasom lo sa'anud. Every widow and orphan you shall not oppress. V'im anei sa'neh oso, and if you do oppress him, ki im tza'ok yitzak elai, when he cries out to me, shamoa eshma tzakato, I will hear his cries. So what does this verse mean? Let's first look at what Rabbi Akiva says in the Mechilta. Rabbi Akiva says that why is the Torah saying specifically a widow and an orphan you cannot oppress? So Rabbi Akiva says, Ba'amana v'yasom. Why is it talking about a widow and an orphan? Because shedarkon lanos behen. Unfortunately, the Torah is speaking in the present, meaning to say the Torah is giving a real world example, because those are the people who typically the world forgets about and the world decides to take advantage of, the people who don't have anybody to advocate on their behalf. That's the simplest explanation, meaning to say there's nobody who's able to stand up on their behalf. But really, it's a general prohibition. So that's the simplest reading. And if you do this, he will cry out to me. And when he cries out, I will hear it. Maybe I might think that if he doesn't cry out, I won't hear. So you mean to say that God's only going to hear if he cries out? The verse says, I shall hear. So what does it mean if cry out, he cry out? means to say, if he cries out, I'll punish you quicker than if he doesn't cry out. That's the way the verse is referring. And that, okay, so this is the basic verse that you shall not oppress a widow or an orphan. This idea is not just a nice, nice thing to live by. This is a law, a law from the Torah that we have to be extra careful never to hurt in any way a widow or an orphan. Never to hurt in any way a widow or an orphan. And if we do so, we're doing a terrible thing. So there's two stories that come to mind. One story they tell this story about the brother of the Tzantzar Rebbe, Rav Avigdor Halbertsam. This is a quicker story, and then there's a longer story. The quicker story is they told the story about Rav Avigdor Halbertsam. He's the brother of the Tzantzar Rebbe. Now, what happened was, one time he was invited to a very chashuv guest. He was very chashuv a host. He was invited to a very distinguished host, and the host was known that when he served the cholent on Shabbos morning, he gave it first to the distinguished guest. The guest took his portion, and then he passed it on to the next people, and that's what happened. So Rav Avigdor Halbertsam was invited to the chashuv host, and he got there, and they sat down. They made the kiddush, the motzi. Then he brings out they bring out the cholent, and Rav Avigdor Halbertsam, he said, please honor us. So he says, he smells it and he takes a bite. He says, oh, this is so good. And he finished the whole bowl. Everybody's aghast. They didn't know what was going on. Usually you take a little bit on your plate and you pass it. Here, he finished the whole bowl. Nobody knew what was going on. So then next thing you know, not only when he finished the bowl, he said, is there any more in the kitchen maybe? And the host was shocked. Nobody had ever done this before, but he figured that if the Rebbe is doing this, he's probably has some deep spiritual connection. He's getting some enormous spiritual inspiration from this cholent. It's probably bringing unity to Hashem Yisbarach. So he said, of course. And they brought out the extra. And when they brought out the extra, of course, what happened? Next thing you know, the Rebbe finished everything too. And then he finished till there was nothing left. So the host was not so chutzpahdik as to ask Rav Avigdor Halbertsam, what are you doing? But his Talmidim who were with him, they had known this Rebbe for many years, and they had never done such a thing. They had never seen him do such a thing. So they waited a few weeks, and then one of them had the courage to say to the Rebbe, what's going on? Why did you eat that whole cholent? He says, I'll tell you, what happened was when they brought me the cholent, right away I smelled, and it smelled like kerosene. And I saw what happened was that the maid had put in the kerosene instead of the vinegar. And I knew that if people would taste it, that the host would have fired her and yelled at her, and she's an orphan, and that would be a biblical violation. So I wanted to make sure that she was not mistreated, and so therefore I ate the whole cholent. Okay. Anyway, let me pause here. If people have questions, I'm happy to address them.